Today's daf is daf mem gimel. By way of introduction, the Gemara daf mem beis amid beis had quoted a brisa, Tanur Rabbanan, which was approximately 10 lines up from the bottom, quoting Rabbi Akiva. And in that brisa of Rabbi Akiva darshaned that there's a hekesh between ish and isha. Ma ish nizakav liyorshim, af isha nizkael liyorshim. That if a woman collects compensation for damages, if she was victimized, then if she dies, the money goes over to her heirs. They will inherit her. And the Gemara asks, how could that be? Rabbi Akiva derives from a pasuk in the parsha of Nachlos and Matos that a husband inherits his wife. And Reish Lakish answered that Rabbi Akiva had a special halacha with regard to kofer. And the reason for that halacha is that a Baal, although he does inherit his wife after she dies, but nevertheless he only inherits that which is muchsak, that's which he has in possession, but not that which is ro'ui. And in the case of kofer, Reish Lakish points out that kofer is ro'ui because the Torah says that kofer is only paid after the death of the shar through skila, and the death of the shar is after her death, because we wouldn't put the shar to death unless she died. So when the pasuk says vehemis isha isha, it means she died. Then hashar yisakel, and then kofer yushas olam. So kofer is only generated, only emerges as a chiyuv after her death, and therefore it's roy. So the Gemara understood from Reish Lakish that Rabbi Akiva was not talking about nizikin in general. As far as all nizakim are concerned, in general, a Baal will inherit his wife. But it's a separate halacha that's unique and restricted to kofer. And on that, the Gemara had asked a stira from a brisa, and that was the end of Daf Mem Beis Amid Beis. And in that brisa, it says that Dmei Vlados, if let's say a man hits a married woman and she loses her Vlados, then the Dmei Vlados go to his yarship. Whereas the Dmei Tsar V'Nezek go to her yarship. So the implication of this brisa, which is the last line on Daf Mem Beis Amid Beis, is that in the case of Shar Nizakim, meaning Nezek and Tsar, Rabbi Akiva holds that the Baal does not inherit those compensational monies that are coming to her. So you see that Rabbi Akiva in that brisa holds that even with regard to Nezek and Tsar, where we didn't have the drasha of Reish Lakish, nevertheless the Baal doesn't inherit her nizakin, and that means that the halacha that her heirs inherit her, that applies not just to kofer specifically, but also to all nizakin, like Nezek and Tsar. And on the top of Daf Mem Gimel Amid Aleph, which is the last thing that we saw yesterday, Rabba and Rav Nachman reinterpret the brisa as referring to a case of a grusha. And in the case of a grusha, which means that after she was victimized, this woman, the husband divorced her, and therefore now, if she dies, he doesn't inherit her nezek and tsar. Even though at the moment that she died, he was still one second. Just want to get the sequence here again. right. It's time T1, T2, T3. At time T1, there was an attack on this married woman, the Masechet. Time T2, he delivered a divorce to his wife, and time T3, she dies from whatever disease or old age she died from. So in that case, says Rabbah, the husband, since he already divorced her before she died, therefore any monies coming to her as a result of a chavola that took place while they were married will now accrue to her yorshim, her heirs, and not to him. But if at the time of her death she was still married to him and he didn't divorce her, then Enochinami, the Baal, will inherit all of her nizakim, with the exception of Kofer. Because in the case of Kofer, Reish Lakish already derived from the pasuk that Kofer is only a chiyuv that emerges after her death. So now the Gemara is going to attack this interpretation of the Brisa of Rabbah and Rav Nachman. Amri, now we're going to have a problem with another point in the Brisa. If you recall, in the Brisa it says that Dmei Volodos Labal, which means that if she miscarries and loses her vlodos because of the chavola, then the Dmei Vlodos will accrue to the Baal, which means that he inherits her Dmei Vlodos. Is therefore, the Gemara asks, Grusha Nami Tiflog B'Dmei Vlodos. Now the word Tiflog has to be changed. The Rashba tells us, because Tiflog sounds like you split it. But the Rashba already points out that the Girsha should be Tishkol Ha'isha Dmei Vlodos. Why should she and her heirs collect Dmei Vlodos? Because you're telling me now, Rabbah and Rav Nachman, that the Bryce is talking about a case where he delivered a divorce. And if he delivered a divorce before she died, then he's out of the picture as far as his ability to inherit her. So why does the Bryce say that the Beit Vlodos are paid to the Baal if he divorced her? And the pasuk from which we derive that the Beit Vlodos in general go to the Baal says in Shmos Chafal pasuk Chav Beis, Kasher Yoshis Olav Baal Ha'isha, which means that the money for Dmei Vlodos is paid to the Baal. Okay, he was a Baal, but now he's no longer Baal because he divorced her. And now we get up to Rav Papa. This is where we ended yesterday. That Rav Papa wants to deflect this kasha that the Gemara is asking on Rabbah and Rav Nachman. Rav Papa, HaTorah zichsa dmei vlodos lebal, afilu ba oleha biznus. In other words, Rav Papa is making a slight revolution here. And he's saying that the Baal's rights to collect dmei vlodos is not because he's married to her, even if he was never ever married to her, but he is the, shall we say, biological father of the Vlodos, and that's through a bias nus outside of wedlock. Nevertheless, he collects Dmei Vlodos, and how much more so in the case of a Grusha where he was married to her. My timer, my krok asher yoshis olav Baal ha'isha. And the Gemara of Rav Papa now is darshaning that the word Baal means Boel, not a husband, but someone who had a child with her. And the Ra'ah is quoted here as saying that if the Torah had meant Baila, then it should have said Baal with a hey at the end. And instead it says Baal, and Baal without a hey implies Bala. So again, according to Rav Papa's answer now, the reason why the Baal inherits the Tmei Velados, even though he divorced his wife before she died, is because the Baal's rights are based on the genetic fatherhood and not on the marriage relationship. So that even after the Gerushin, he still collects Tmei Velados. So Gemara asks the following question: why did Rabbah and Rav Nachman feel compelled to interpret the Bryce in the case of Grusha, Nukma? Okay, now let's take a little break here before the rest of the sentence. Nukma. The Gemara is now going to introduce a machlokas between Rabbah and Rav Nachman, and we're going to have to spend a little time understanding that machlokas, but be that as it may, what's common to both Rabbah and Rav Nachman is that we have a concept called ro'ui, and that means that if there's a chov, an outstanding debt that has to be paid up to a woman, and it hasn't been paid yet, so the Baal Chov has not yet delivered the money, then we consider it as ro'ui. That means that with her death, the Baal does not have rights to inherit that debt. What's the machlok shin Rabbah and Rav Nachman? LeRabbah kagon shegavu mos. So let's go back to the case of Chavola. Somebody was chovel in a married woman, and therefore he incurs a chiyuv to pay nezek and tsar. Now, she dies, and the chovel pays nezek and tsar in cash, in currency. So Rabbah says in such a case, the Baal will not inherit his wife and collect the Dmei nezek and tsar because that's called ro'ui. Cash is called ro'ui. In other words, it's not that she has the money in her bank account. It hasn't yet been transferred to her bank account. Rav Nachman says, Kigon shegavu karka. Rav Nachman says the opposite, that if they paid in karka, in real estate, that's called ro'ui. And the reason Rav Nachman came to that conclusion is because we have halacha of Yerushas Bechor, and the Gemara at the end of Bava Basra in Perkei Shnochen says that a Bechor, although he gets Pishnaim, he doesn't collect the second double portion from Roy. And therefore, if, let's say, the Yarshim of this woman collect a Chov, no, I'm sorry, forget about this woman. That was a mistake. If the father of this Bechor did not collect that Chov during his lifetime, and therefore his Yarshim after he dies will collect that Chov, the Bechor does not get his double portion from that Chov, and that's called Roy. The Omar Rabbah, Govu Karka Yeshlo. If after the death of the father, the Yarshim collected the Chov that was outstanding debt to their father in Karka, then that Karka, according to Rabbah, is not called Roy. Why? Because there's a shibud, a lien, on that Karka. So it's almost as if the father in his lifetime owned that Karka. He already had a slight, or more than a slight, but a partial possession of the Karka. Gavu mos elo. But if the debt is going to be paid posthumously to the Yarshim in currency, then Rabbah holds that the Bechor does not get Pishnai. Rav Nachman Omar, Gavu mos yeshlo, just the opposite. Gavu karka einlo. According to Rav Nachman, the Mos are basically restoring what was in the father's possession. Let's say, for example, the father had Mos, he extended a loan, and virtually he's returning that loan when it's paid up is the money that he gave to the lova is now going back to the malva, to the father. So it was already muchsak. But karka, ein lo. If the debt will be paid up in karka, according to Rav Nachman, that's still considered roy. Now let's apply that machlokes and that yardstick to the case of chovel be'isha. A married woman was victimized with an assault, and now the chovel has to pay nezek and tsar. She dies, and the question is, does the Baal collect nezek and tsar? The answer is no, because ein a Baal yorish b'roy. Again, what would be roy? It depends. According to Rabbah, Mos would be roy. According to Rav Nachman, karka would be roy. But either way, you don't have to introduce here the case of grusha. Forget about grusha. The husband is cut out of the Yerusha of Tashlumei Nezek and Tsar because it's Roy. Amri, so the Gemara answers, Hani milu b'nei Marov al liba de Rabbana. The machlokas between Rabbah and Rav Nachman around revolving a bachar only applies to the tradition of the Bnei Marava reflecting the Shita of the Chachamim. And what is that tradition of Rabbanon? There's something called shvach. In other words, shvach means increment in monetary terms that came into the father's possession, but only after the father died, and that's called roy. But Kikamar Hacha, when Rav and Rav Nachman was speaking here, they were reflecting the sheet of Rebbe who disagrees with Rabbanon, and he holds that shvach is called muchzak. What does that mean? Shvach is called muchzak. It's not roy, because it was shvach me'alehem. Me'alehem means it wasn't that, the father in his lifetime planted seeds and they took and they produced fruit on the tree posthumously after he died. That's called roy, because that's shvach haba yidei maisa. But if it's shvach haba al yidei al me'alehem, then according to Rebbe's sheet, at least, it's not called roy, it's called muchsa. So therefore, according to Rebbe, it matters not whether or not the dmei tsar and nezek were collected posthumously after her death in Mos or in Karka. It's always considered muchzak, and the Baal will always inherit it. And therefore, there was no choice in Rab and Rav Nachman going on Rebbe Shita, but to interpret the Brisa as referring to a grusha. Now we have to also point out here, as Rashi points out, that even Rebbe would be moda that as far as kofar is concerned, that's called road, because kofar is only a chiv that emerges posthumously after her death, and therefore she didn't have any rights during her lifetime to collect kofar. She was still alive. So what we just did in the last 15 minutes is learn half of Perek Yesh Nochlin of Bava Basra. That's the nature of a Talmud Bava. In any event, let's just summarize the bottom line here. As far as Nezek and Tsar is concerned, according to Rebbe, that's not called Roy, that's called Muchzak. Why? Because it's Shvach Me'alehem. And therefore, Rabbah and Rav Nachman had no choice but to introduce Grusha. Now, just 1 second. There's one thing that bothers my mind here. And Tmei Velados. Right. And as far as the Meivlados, we said that the Baal inherits it because it has nothing to do with marriage, right? It's even in the case of Znus, the Baal has rights to collect the Meivlados because those are his children biologically. But as far as other Nezikin, since he divorced his wife, therefore, obviously, he cuts himself off from the Yerusha, and it's irrelevant whether it's Roy or Muhsak, because he delivered a divorce. Had he not delivered a divorce, then the Baal would certainly inherit all the damim of Nezek and Tsar, even though those monies came in liachar misa, because we're holding like Rebbe, and those are called shvach me'aleim, and they're muhsak and not roy. Okay. Now the Gemara goes back to the question of a shorsh and nogach that killed a person, and we know that the Torah says in such a case you pay kofer, or in the case of a shor that kills an eved, you pay shloshim shel eved. What about a case of shelo b'kavan? So the animal killed a person without even realizing that it was killing a person. Maybe it was attacking another animal. Omer Reish Lakish, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, shor she'emes eved. Again, we're talking about an eved Kanani. Let's just point that out. Shelo b'kavana. Now, watch what happens here. If there was no kavana, then the shor is not stoned. The shor is not considered a killer shor if it was shelo b'kavana. And now we're saying, according to Reish Lakish, that if there's no din of skila on the shor, then the Baal HaShor doesn't have to pay kofer. Potter v'shloshim shkolim. So again, we're talking about killing an eved. Normally there's a knas, a kofer of shloshim shel eved. Here, there's no kofer, because the animal is not put to death. It killed without kavan. Shenemar. And now we have a hekesh. Kesef shloshim shkolim yitein ladonav hashor yisakel. The Torah in one breath speaks about the chiyuv kofer that's imposed upon the Baal HaShor and the chiyuv skila on the shor itself. And therefore, based on this hekesh, calls man shashor b'skila b'ayla mishal m'shloshim kol. Ein hashor b'skila ein b'ayla mishal m'shloshim shkol. So in the case of shelo b'kavana, where the animal is not put to death, the Baal doesn't have to pay kofer. Now, how do we know that if the shor killed without kavan, it's not put to death? That's based on the pasuk hashor yisakel v'gam ba'ol of yumos, and the Gemara later on in Daf Mem Daled is going to darshan kimisas habaylim kach misas shor. A shor is condemned to death through stoning, the same way that a person would normally be condemned to death for whatever crimes that are capital punishment. And a person is only put to death for a crime that he committed b'kavana, and shelo b'kavana is potur, and therefore the shor also shelo b'kavana is potur. Now we're saying the Baal doesn't have to pay kofer. Omar Rabba, shor she'emes ben chorin. Now we're talking about a case not of an eved, but the kofer that you pay when your shor kills a person. Shelo b'kavana potur b'kofer. Again, we're going to apply the same hekesh. Shenemar hashor yisakel v'gam b'olav yumos im kofer yushas olav. So both these psukim are in Shmos Chaf Aleph. The first pasuk, Kesef Shloshim Shkolim Vashor Yisakel, that's pasuk Lamed Beis, and now we go back to psukim Chavtes and Lamed, and there once again we have the same hekesh in a case of Hemis as Ben Chorin. Kol zman shashor b'skila b'ayla b'shalom kofer, ein hashor b'skila and b'ayla b'shalom kofer. And now Abai is going to raise an objection to Rabbah based on our Mishnah. Based on a Mishnah, Ksubas Chafal. Mema. Esvei Abaye, We're now going into the law of Moda v'Knas Potter. And here a person came into Bezdin and he confessed that Hamish Shari is Ploni. So we have no independent evidence that Ruvain's Shar killed Shimon, except for Ruvain's own confession. Oh, Shar shall Ploni. Or Ruvain confesses that his Shar killed the Shar of Shimon. Hareza Mishalim al Piatzma. Why does confession generate a chiv to pay? After all, Moda v'Knas is potter. The answer is that this tashlum is not considered a knas. My lab kofer. Aren't we talking about kofer? Now wait a second. If we're talking about kofer, the shor is not going to be put to death. Because again, kemisas abaylam kach misas shor, which means that unless we have evidence, we can't put a person to death. A man comes into Bezdin and admits that he murdered someone. We don't put him to death. We need Aiden. And so too, we can't put the shor to death unless we have Aiden, because of the hekesh between misas adam and misas ashor. And here in this case, the only evidence that we have is the confession of the owner of the shor. So how could it be hareza mishalad al piatzmo? If the shor is not going to be put to death through stoning, then we've established in the previous Gemara, Reish Lakish and Rabbah, that the Bailam don't have to pay kofer. So Gemara answers low. The Mishnah is not talking. The Mishnah in Ksubas is not talking about kofer, but rather domin. Domin means that we evaluate the nerag, the victim, as an eved in the marketplace, and that's what he has to pay. And that payment is like any other chiv mamon. It's called domim. It's not a knas. And other mishalim al piatzmo hodos bal din kibei edim dom. Now, if a man killed another man, then he would also have to pay domim to the Yarshim. And therefore, even though the shar is not a shar niskal, but the laws that would apply to killing a man would apply now to the shar that killed a man. So if it was a man who killed a man, he would pay domim to the Yarshim. And so too, if a shar kills a man, the Baal Shar pays domim to the Yarshim. And that's mamo. That's not kofer. That's not knas. So here there's a long, long discussion in the Rishonim. It starts with Rashi, and goes on to Tosfos and other Rishonim. What's going on over here? What's the difference between domim and kofer? In both cases, let's say, for example, we had a machlokes about whether shaman bid a nizak or bid a mazik. So let's say we go according to the Mandiyoma right now, bid a nizak shaymina, which means that kofer, in the case of a ben chorin, in Eved, if the shor kills an Eved, it's standard absolute shloshim kesef. But in the case of ben chorin, then we evaluate the life of the victim. And if that's what kofer is all about, that's exactly the same as domim. What is domim if not evaluating the life, the value on the market as a slave of the victim? So what's the difference between domim and kofer? So I'll just mention two shitos here, Rashi and Tosfos. Rashi's shita, and again, this shita of Rashi is clarified by the Ravid, that in a case where there's no mammon in the bank account of the Baal Hashor, if it's a chiv kofer, then he's chayiv misa. The kofer is going to save him from misa bidei shamayim. And therefore, he has to work very hard to make sure that he could acquire the money to pay for the kofar. But if he's only chai b'tor's damim, for example, in our case where it's hodas atzmo, and there's no chiv kofar in hodas atzmo, I should say it a little better. There's no chiv kofar because the shar is not put to death because it was only hodas atzmo. So therefore, if he has no mammon in his bank account, he's not obligated to run around and guarantee that he can acquire money to save himself from Misa. It's only a chiyuv of mama. Tosas, on the other hand, says that if the Baal Hashar was the one who died, if it's a chiyuv kapara, the Yorshim don't have to pay up kapara. There's no kapara liachar Misa mechaperes. The Yorshim don't have to worry about that. But if it's a chiyuv damim, then they'll have to pay. Yeah, those are just two shitos in the Rishon. Frek the Gemara, how can you tell me that we're talking about a chiyuv damim in this Mishnah in Ksubis? Ema Sefer, let's look at the Sefer of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that if there was a confession, Hamish Shori es Avdo Shel Ploni, my Shar killed his Eved, Eno Mishalim, he doesn't pay, meaning Shloshim Shkolim, the Knas of Eved, of Shosha Agasem, Al Piatzma. V'i Damim, but if you're going to tell me that we're talking about a Chiv Damim, which is paid for the killing of a man, then even if he was Modeh, it's not a Knas, it's a Chiv Mammon, it's a Chiv Damim. And therefore you should pay Damim. And the Mishnah says, Eino Mishalim Al Piatzma. Obviously, we're not talking about Damim, we're talking about Kofer. And Kofer is a Knas of Shloshim Shel Evet. Amalei. So he responds, probably Rab is the one who responds to Abaye. I can really get away with it by saying that the Reisha is talking about a Chiv Damim, and therefore he's Chayiv Al Piatzma. Just 1 second. It should be the other way around. Should be Sefer B'Domim. No. The Sefer says Eino Mishalim Al Piyas. So that's referring to a Knas. That's referring to Kofer. So the Reish is talking about Domim, and that's what we said earlier, that Abaye interpreted the Rabbah interpreted the Reish as referring to Domim. And that's why if he admits he's got to pay Domim, his confession generates a Chiv Mom because and we're not talking about a knas, and there could be no knas because the shor is not beskila based on hodas atzmo. The sefer, on the other hand, is talking about what? It's talking about kofer, and since it's al pi atzmo, therefore the halacha is modav knas is part. But that's a very difficult way of understanding a Mishnah, to say the Mishnah is talking about one chiyuv and the Sefer of the Mishnah is talking about a whole different chiyuv. And therefore, I'm not going to give you a teretz that's dachuk, dechika, lo meshaninulch, I'm not going to give you such a teretz, but rather idi ve'idi dam. So both the Reisha and the Sefer are talking about dam. And again, let's before we turn to Mem Gimel and Beis, let's just emphasize that in the Reisha, we said that he's Meshalem Al Piatzmo. And in the Sefer, we said, in the case of an Eved, is Eino Meshalem Al Piatzmo.